The Institute for Supply Management's annual conference is fast approaching. On May 6th, thousands of industry professionals will gather in Nashville, Tennessee to network, exchange best practices, and discuss emerging trends. Here at Source One, we're getting ready for the year's premier supply management conference with our new series, ISM2018 Session Insights. Tune in every week to hear our experts discuss the topics that promise to dominate the conversation at this year's conference.
When companies hire the wrong procurement professional, they lose much more than that individual's salary. Productivity, reputation, morale, and client relationships all suffer when procurement hires fail to reach their potential. Today's procurement leaders are facing an ever-widening talent gap. That means their hiring and recruiting decisions are more important than ever. Unfortunately, many lack the internal resources to develop the appropriate talent management processes. Overworked and understaffed, they're repeatedly faced with mismatched hires and disappointing results. An expert procurement recruiter, Andy Jones has helped countless organizations supplement their hiring efforts and identify their ideal candidates. Today, he joins ISM 2018 Session Insights to discuss the consequences of a poor hiring decision and speak to the benefit of a third-party perspective.
So we're joined again by Andy Jones here to talk about some of the pitfalls of making the wrong procurement hire. To get started, Andy, for companies who've hesitated or never considered working with a recruiter before, how would you sell them on the idea? Does it all come down to avoiding hiring the wrong person?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects involved. Number one, it doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes, right? Like, we all make mistakes. Have I hired somebody that didn't work out? Absolutely. But it's way more of the rare occurrence than the opposite. So I think probably within the past year, got about 36 placements. And I'd say 3 out of those 36 didn't work out for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty good number. So it's as close to a guarantee as you can get, number one. But number two, it also kind of alleviates risk. I think of it as a little bit like insurance. You're placing the risk on us, and you're not, as a hiring manager, fully accepting that risk. So if it doesn't work out, you can always come back and blame us at the end of the day, right? You can look for somebody to blame. It could be me.
Mm-hmm. Could you speak more to the benefit of an outside perspective? Besides the time and bandwidth, what else does a recruiter bring to the recruitment process that an internal hiring team might lack?
From a dollars and cents standpoint, if we put the wrong person in there, we would have to go again and work to find another candidate to fill that same position, and we wouldn't get paid for it. So in a sense, we're doing work for free, which no company, and I'm not trying to sound like we're greedy, but no organization wants to do work for free. So we have an automatic vested interest, right? Mm. And also to be able to get repeat business as well. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing right off the bat so we can get that repeat business. And this is how we make our living. I mean, this is how I make my living. I don't necessarily have the safety net of being able to be like an internal recruiter. I'm a third party. I always keep that in mind. You kind of treat your clients like gold and put them up on a pedestal. If you're putting your client on a pedestal, be careful of who to put forward and who not to put forward. The last thing I want as a recruiter is to sling paper towards a client and have my reputation go downhill. And so in other words, we're a guest in the client's house, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You're sort of responsible for selling both the client and the candidate. Yeah. And obviously yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Well. And how do you familiarize yourself with HR and the organizations you're recruiting for? How do you embed yourself in a company's operations?
Just basically calling HR and introducing myself, working more as a partner. A lot of the times with contract positions, you're really not working with HR all that much, if at all. When it comes to permanent hires, just because there's so many different people inside the organization that have to go ahead and interview each candidate, HR has to get a little bit more involved. But I make sure I coordinate with HR, just telling them kind of what we expect, schedule the interviews, etc. But at the end of the day, it's always me making sure that the candidate stays on board. So, it does alleviate some responsibility off of the shoulders of HR too, so that they can do their normal day-to-day instead of having to keep up with candidates.
Would you say that the rigors of that day-to-day is what might lead a company to hire the wrong person? Is it a question of being overextended?
Yeah, I'd say so. Absolutely. They don't have a 100% focus in that. They can, but it's just impossible. So when you're working with somebody that all they do is focus on making sure an organization has the right talent pool, it's a lot less likely to strike out.
And when we talk about a bad hire, what exactly does that look like? How does a company know they've hired the wrong person?
I mean, you can pretty much tell, I think, after the first couple weeks if somebody's going to work out or not. I mean, various examples, people calling out an extended amount of times within the first 2 weeks, showing up late, being a distraction at work, being negative. Those are all examples of how you can find a bad hire, and they typically surface pretty early on while the person's working there.
And how early in your recruitment process can you sniff out someone who's a potential bad hire?
Usually pretty early. It doesn't take long. I mean, the funny thing is that the candidates that we work with will share more with us than what they will the end client. Mm-hmm. So since they're willing to divulge more and share more, you can figure out pretty quickly if the person's going to work or not. And if they're not going to work, we automatically pull them from the process. We're not about shoving a candidate in there just to get somebody in the seat and get a placement fee.
What are some of the most common red flags you've observed?
People not getting back in touch with you soon. I mean, I know we all have things going on, but let's face it, at the end of the day, we all have text, we all have email coming straight to our phones. So, if I call to follow up with somebody and they see it's my number, they can shoot me a quick text, or they can proactively shoot me a text, or proactively shoot me an email. If I go a couple of days without hearing from somebody, that right away is a huge indication that I don't want to move forward with them.
And what does a company stand to lose if they hire the wrong person? What are some of the immediate costs and the long-term costs of a bad hiring decision? 15
to 20% or 24% of the hiring manager's salary. So that's huge. I believe it's nationwide in 2017. It was somewhere in the $860 million range as far as the total cost of bad hires, which is huge. So if you lose that much money, that's immediately a bad thing. And also in the long term, it's a bad thing too. You're losing money. You're losing net income.
And what are some of the soft dollar costs of hiring the wrong person? How might it affect company culture?
Morale. I mean, just think about it when you go to work every day. If you're sitting next to somebody who was like overly negative, loud, boisterous, didn't show up, meaning you had to shoulder some of their load, not doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can kind of go on and on. I mean, if you were sitting next to somebody who, I guess, was a bad hire and a bad employee, it would affect you and increase your frustration.
Could a bad hire impact a company's brand in the long run? If they maybe get a reputation for subpar hiring decisions, could that affect their recruitment efforts moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. It could affect their brand. I mean, it would affect everybody's brand. Think about it. If we had a bad hire and that person was on the phone with a client and they handled themselves in a manner that's not professional, well, then that would be a client viewing source one and tagging the image of source one to that person. So yeah, absolutely, it would affect the company's brand. Maybe they would overanalyze as to not pick the wrong candidate as well, which would slow up the hiring process. So I would say yes.
Mm-hmm. How do you go about determining what a company you're recruiting for would consider an ideal hire? What does that briefing process look like?
So in the beginning, when they come to us with a need, we make sure we have a phone call with them, and we'll keep them on the phone for 45 minutes to an hour just to vet them out completely. So it all comes down to conversation and talking to people, asking them what kind of personality they want to deal with beyond the technical skills.
And is the definition of a bad hire typically pretty constant, or have you run into situations where there was something unique that a company was particularly not looking for?
No, I'd say it's extremely consistent. A bad hire means a bad employee for the myriad of reasons we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. What do you look for that's not on a resume when you're vetting a candidate for a client? How do you go beyond how they might look on paper?
Personality is huge. If I'm recruiting for an organization or a company that wants like a fast-paced, aggressive type of personality, and then you have somebody on the phone that's kind of monotone and not really able to make a decision right away, well, that's something that I listen for. Other things too, like if I have a time where I'm supposed to call somebody and speak with them, and I call them and they're not available, well, that to me is a major red flag. you can give somebody a heads up. Like I said, we all have email and texting on our phones. Everybody has my cell phone number and everybody has my email address. So you can at least give me a heads up. To me, if you miss a time and not give me a heads up, then it's not a huge priority for you. And I'm not going to put somebody that doesn't have trying to find a particular position as a priority. I'm not going to go ahead and submit them to a client. Just like anything that you do, the best learning is by messing up. I make sure all the time that I always listen to my gut. Because your gut's usually right. I mean, I think we all have instincts that we sometimes choose to not listen to and turn off. I just make sure I listen to mine.
Thanks, Andy.
No problem. Thank you.
You've been listening to ISM2018 Session Insights. Tune in next week to hear more from the procurement leaders at Source One.